Greetings and welcome to this program about Warrant Article 6 on fair redistricting. My name's Mary Beth Raven and I'm a 30-year resident of Merrimack. My husband and I raised our two girls here. And my co-host today is Ray Waterman. Ray, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm a resident of Merrimack also. My wife and I moved here in 2003. And I retired in 2012 after a 40 plus year career in engineering. We wish to do our part to preserve a government structured and dedicated to creating the common good. And we are active members of open democracy.
Terrific. Thanks, Ray. We're also joined here today by Brian Beal, the Deputy Director at a nonprofit called Open Democracy. I have a few slides and then I'm going to turn it over to Ray and Brian to have pretty much most of the discussion. But we're here today to talk about Article 6 on the ballot on Election Day on April 13th. So let me go ahead and share a slide about that. So first of all, we are having elections on April 13th, and it's particularly important this year to vote. We have a lot going on, a special election to replace our state representative, Dick Hinch, who passed away. We're electing school board members, town council members, and we're voting on 6 warrants, including Article 6 on nonpartisan fair redistricting. So this year, based on the 2020 census information, the New Hampshire legislature will create new districts for our 2 congressional districts, our state representatives, our state senators, our state executive counselor districts, and our county commissioners. So as per the Merrimack rules, we had over 50 people sign a petition to get this warrant on the ballot this year. And this is what you will see on the ballot. I am going to read it, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ray to ask some questions about it. So the warrant article reads, New Hampshire Resolution for Nonpartisan Fair Redistricting. To see if the town will vote to urge that the New Hampshire General Court, which is obligated to redraw the maps of political districts within the state following the federal census, will ensure fair and effective representation of New Hampshire voters without gerrymandering. Additionally, to ask the town of Merrimack to urge the New Hampshire General Court to carry out the redistricting in a fair and transparent way through public meetings, not to favor a particular political party, to include communities of interest, and to minimize flotarial districts. The record of the vote approving this article shall be transmitted by written notice from the town clerk to Merrimack state legislators, informing of the demands from their constituents within 30 days of the vote. Now, we would like you all to vote yes on this. And I'm going to right now, we've prepared some questions to help us explain all of this and understand it better. And so I believe, Ray, you have a couple questions for Brian, and then I have a few more.
I do. And my first question is, since the petition asks that redistricting be fair, can you explain what redistricting is, Brian?
I absolutely can, Ray. And again, thanks for having me, both Ray and Mary Beth. I'm glad to answer these questions because it's a kind of a complicated and wonky issue. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to show you some slides that'll help me explain everything. So every 10 years, we have the US Census. And normally by this time, we in that 10-year cycle, we normally have the data that has come from the Census Bureau. Unfortunately, this year, because of COVID last year and some political wranglings, it has not arrived and won't be in New Hampshire until the end of September. So the redistricting process, as Mary Beth describes, creates these maps for all of these different types of elected seats, all the way down to our local county commissioners, but also for cities as well. So Manchester, Concord, Nashua are all redoing their wards according to what population up or down has happened, or how the population has migrated. For instance, in New Hampshire, we've had people who have left the North Country and come south. There are more people in the Lakes region. And supposedly, according to the estimates from the Census Bureau, there's a net gain of about 5,500 people since the last census. But interestingly, more people have died here in New Hampshire than have been born. So they're saying that people are moving in from outside of New Hampshire.
So the second question I have is, I know that when redistricting is not fair, it's called gerrymandering. That's pretty well known, I think. Can you tell us more about what gerrymandering actually is?
Well, first, I'd like to just address what fair redistricting is, and then we'll hit gerrymandering. How about that, Ray?
Sounds good.
So fair redistricting doesn't use partisan data. So we're not looking at who's a Republican, who's a Democrat, who's independent. That's the way it's supposed to work. Our fair redistricting New Hampshire follows a constitutional amendment that makes sure that towns of 3,291 or more get their own state rep district. That number is going to change come this year. It'll probably just be a touch higher. And then it also takes into consideration communities of interest, things like school districts, shared economies, water, natural features like lakes and mountains are all things that are kind of communities of interest in New Hampshire that we'd like to take into consideration. So putting a big city with a little bitty rural town doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Because they're completely different environments. And then we want fair redistricting also uses kind of sensible boundaries, not crazy wavy lines, et cetera. So in Merrimack, so I'm showing you a map of the current districts. These were done in 2011. And what you see up here in Merrimack is you see that Merrimack is in Hillsborough 21, and it's got its own district. Merrimack has its own state reps. They don't share them with any other town. They also, in Merrimack, don't have a flotarial district. And we'll talk about flotarial districts in a minute. Merrimack is kind of an island unto itself because it's not really connected. But if you look at the adjoining towns, you're going to see these yellow lines. Okay, so that is a flotarial district. That is the flotarial district called Hillsborough 41, which is Amherst and Bedford. There's another one here with Litchfield and Manchester. And I'm going to address why that's significant. So you asked me about what's gerrymandering. Well, what happens with gerrymandering, Ray, is that the numbers, the towns get manipulated. The lines get manipulated to pack or crack is the term for it. Putting people of, usually it's done with partisan data. Sometimes it's done with racial or religious data. In this case, in New Hampshire, it's mostly a partisan thing where they'll take people of one particular party and pack them into one district, leaving the adjoining districts with a larger population of the majority, the party that's in the majority. So it also gets used to keep incumbents in office. So powerful senators or congressmen will want lines drawn so that they can keep their seat and be unchallenged. And it controls elections. See, the bad part of this is people don't bother to vote. If it's so lopsided, then the opponents, the people who are in the minority, they'll just not vote because they're going to give up. And then you've got the majority where, hey, we always win, so we're not going to bother because other people will vote and show up, and we don't need to worry about it. So gerrymandering, as you can see here, what this basically is redrawing lines very creatively so that even if you're in the minority in numbers, you can still have the majority of the votes. Some examples of that nationally are Wisconsin, and in North Carolina and Texas. But right here in New Hampshire, we have some really great examples of how this was done. And remember that whole packing and cracking thing I was talking about. So in 2011, we had some maps that were drawn unfairly. And like I said, get so your vote doesn't matter anymore. But one of the things that we're asking for in this resolution that Mary Beth read is that the process in 2011 was done by 3 people behind closed doors, and the public didn't see the software they were using. They didn't see the data they were using. And so the public didn't really have any idea what criteria was used. And it's really important that the public stay in this process. And, the permanent solution to this is to have an independent redistricting commission, but that bill has been vetoed a couple of times and we've not been able to get one in place. So what I'm showing you here is how even though we don't have a lot of squiggly lines on our map, I'd like to show you some of the towns around Merrimack that have, fairly sizable populations and that should have their own state rep districts. And the one we use very often here is Hudson and Pelham. They're in Hillsborough 37. And if you look at the populations here, remember I gave you that number of 3,191, 291, excuse me. Though Hudson is connected with Pelham in a state rep district. And between them, they have 24,401 district in Hudson and almost 13,000 in Pelham. They should both have their own state rep districts and have multiple reps. And how this goes bad is Hudson, there are 11 state rep seats between the 2 towns. 9 of them are people who live in Hudson, and poor Pelham only gets 2. So that's not exactly fair either. But the reason this was done is that Hudson is a very red town and Pelham tends to be purple. And by putting those towns together, it created a consistently red district and basically one that would win every time. So that's how that happens.
Interesting.
So those are the numbers I just showed you. And the New Hampshire House has 400 seats and 204 districts. There are no limits to the number of districts, only to the number of seats. So those districts, there could be towns that get their own. Right now, there are 62 towns that are eligible that don't have their own state rep district. So we've got a long way to go there. We have 24 Senate districts. And I'd like you to, it's a little hard to see, but right on the bottom here, you're going to see Senate District 9. Look at that one that goes all the way along here. And that was done to encompass Republican towns along the way there. And then the Executive Council, this is the one that everybody points to, including the governor, is the dragon. This is the dragon here in Executive Council 2 that stretches from really rural Hinsdale in the southwest corner of the state all the way over to Portsmouth. And, Seacoast versus, on the Vermont and Massachusetts border. I mean, that's crazy. So that's one of the examples that we can give you. Okay. What other questions do you have?
One about Merrimack. Since Merrimack has its own set of 8 reps, they're the so-called at-large reps. Each of them represents the whole town. So why should Merrimack residents care about redistricting?
Good question, Ray. So when a town doesn't get its own state rep district, I'm going to go back to Pelham for an example, right? So they are not being properly represented in Concord because they have fewer reps than they are entitled to, and so they're not getting fair representation in Concord. It harms the state too, in that the state doesn't reflect the whole of what it should have for its population. So it's skewed one way or the other, and it's not giving the state the proper decisions. Here's another example that's kind of important to Merrimack. Merrimack and surrounding towns have the issue with the PFAS chemical. And if you have a rep who doesn't live in town, who's not affected by that, you may get representation, not enough representation to fix that problem in Concord. So that's where it affects the town, it affects the state, but most importantly, it affects the voters, because the voters aren't getting the representation that they deserve.
Okay, good. One other question, going back to the warrant, what's the meaning of the flotarial district?
Well, we'll call it, instead of flotarial, I think we should call them fudge factor districts. So when they draw these maps, New Hampshire has some components of its constitution that don't allow them to split towns. So they can't split a town. The only exception to that are city wards. But they can't split a town in half and give half of it to one district and half of it to another district. There's another constitutional mandate that says you can't cross county borders for a state rep seat. So because of those, sometimes it gets kind of complicated to make the math come out right. And so they put these flotarial districts in as kind of a fudge factor, so that they could take all the residual population and make sure that everybody got a proper amount of representation. The problem is that they did too much of that in 2011. And they used those flotarials and tried to gerrymander those flotarials too. And as an example on the map I showed you a couple minutes ago, I showed you Litchfield. Mm-hmm. Litchfield is connected in this flotarial that goes in this little narrow corridor up to 2 wards in Manchester. There is another one that's northwest of Merrimack, which includes Francistown, which is in the Conval School District, but then has Lineborough, Mount Vernon, and something else. There are 4 towns in that district, which are in a different school district. And this is where the communities of interest that I mentioned come into play, right? So you've got a rep that's trying to represent 2 different school districts, where the Conval School District, I think, is 9 towns. And I can't remember what's the name of the high school in that area, but
Conval.
Well, Conval, but then the one that serves Mount Vernon and I'm not
Amherst. Sure.
Yeah, I don't remember the name of that school district, but
yes. So I have a question similar to Ray's previous question, right? So Merrimack has our own 8 reps. Mm-hmm. So Merrimack does not have any flotarial people right now. So why should Merrimack residents, be concerned about flotarial districts?
Well, it could be that this time they do get a flotarial, and that's entirely possible as they redo these
because
maps.
We've got Nashua wards on one end and Merrimack wards on the other end of town. Okay. It
very well could happen, and of course there have been shifts in population in this area, particularly in southeastern New Hampshire. So that would not surprise me. So why would you care? Well, I mean, this could change the representation that Merrimack gets. So that's and how it all comes out as far as the representation you actually get in Concord.
Okay. I see we've got just over 5 minutes left. So is there any interest beyond the state or New Hampshire for fair and transparent redistricting, like you mentioned in, what was it, Wisconsin?
All over the place. There are some poster children of redistricting and gerrymandering around the country. Pennsylvania, Michigan to a certain extent, Wisconsin for absolute certainty, Ohio, and then in the South you see this in Texas. You see this in some of the southern deep South states like Mississippi and Alabama. North Carolina is one that's been known for racial gerrymandering in North Carolina.
Okay.
So yes, it's a nationwide problem. And even a lot of conservatives over the years, Ronald Reagan, the governor of Texas, or governor of Ohio, John Kasich, has spoken about this as being a problem. President Reagan called it a kind of a scourge upon American politics, and said it absolutely had to be fixed, because in some places it is the Democrats do it to the Republicans. Maryland is a great example of that, where the Democrats have controlled the strings for a long time. Chicago, in the city of Chicago, Democrats have controlled the city and do it to keep Republicans at bay there. So the New Hampshire resolution for fair nonpartisan redistricting is something that what we're trying to do is make sure that the voters have their say. Gerrymandering tends to happen because party leaders want to maintain power, where the voters, they see fairness for what it is. They want it to be a level playing field.
Okay, I've got a question about some technology, Brian. Nowadays, with so-called big data and artificial intelligent computer programming, has technology exacerbated this redistricting process?
Well, good question. We're working with a group out of Tufts University that is a research group that has been working on tools for the average citizen to use, but the software that is being used to do gerrymandering in the states that we talked about is very sophisticated, right down to the street and block level. That can tell who voted in what elections and what party they voted for, how many African Americans live on that particular block. It's very sophisticated, and it's basically run off of big databases. And you can have that data, but is it fair is the question. And I think most voters will say using that kind of data is not fair.
I've got one more question, Mary Beth. Have we still got time?
Yep, we've got about 2.5, 3 minutes.
Oh, okay. How do the redistricting maps get approved?
Good question. We, of course, I mentioned the independent redistricting commissions failed, but in our Constitution, we have our House legislature has the power to create something called a special committee on redistricting. That just met for the first time in the second week of March. And they are, that is 8 Republican legislators and 7 Democratic legislators. And they will be overseeing this process. They will be drawing the maps or setting the criteria, drawing the maps, working out the details, and then submitting it to the legislature for approval. And there are supposed to be some public hearings as part of that. Like I said, last time that didn't happen. We're trying to make sure that the New Hampshire resolution forces them to make sure that that's all done in the public eye.
Okay, so actually, with just a few minutes left, that seems like a great thing. So first of all, for us to do is first vote yes on this warrant article, Article 6, vote yes on April 13th. Second is keep an eye out for when there are these public hearings. And so what else can we do, Brian?
Well, writing letters and being in contact with your state representatives is really important. And there are basically two groups of representatives that you need to be speaking with right now. You need to call your own Merrimack reps. And I've got a slide in just a second that's going to show you the list. And then there's that special election that's coming up as well. And you'll have somebody else to talk to as well. But write letters or emails to the Special Committee on Redistricting. The open democracy teams around the state have already started doing that and have had some conversations with those members. And basically, we're asking for the same thing that we're asking for in the New Hampshire resolution: fair, nonpartisan, and transparent process for redistricting. And then when at some point, not probably next year, but the year after that, there will be more independent redistricting commissions. Remember I said that right now the balance is 8 to 7.
Right.
The independent redistricting commissions will be 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and 5 unaffiliated voters.
Okay, good.
So
yes.
Everybody will it will be fair. And the people for that are chosen kind of a jury process. So it's kind of a good way, a fair way of creating those maps rather than having one party dominate.
Terrific. Terrific. Great. So you've got a list of our representatives up right now. We've got 7 because we have the open seat to replace Dick Hinch. And so you can take a look, pause your TVs or whatever if you wanted to write down these addresses. And our Senator Gary Daniels as well. That's terrific. So once again, we're just about out of time. I want to remind you to please consider voting yes on Article 6 and also contact our reps and try to encourage them to make sure that this is a fair process for everybody. Brian and Ray, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And let's go try to make this fair redistricting happen. Thanks.
Go out and vote.
Wonderful.